When thinking about how to best center the key moment for this commemoration, we decided that having those most personally involved would bring you closer to the events of the courageous historic stand that took place on this spot 60 years ago. What led to it? Why it is significant civil rights legacy for Baton Rouge, the city of Baton Rouge. Well, when you hear from Debra George, Pearl George's daughter, who was there at the attempted swim-in, and Theda Martinez Williams, whose brother Frank Martinez drowned in City Park Lake at 16, you will see why they are chosen. And I want to say that I heard that Miss Brooks is here. Is that what you said? Miss Brooks is here? Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So I will begin by introducing Theda Martinez Williams. Theda was 1 month from turning 3 years old when her 16-year-old brother Frank drowned in City Park Lakes. And Theda offers amazing recall of the details around that monumental moment in her and her family members' lives and all of South Baton Rouge. Theda, when your brother Frank drowned, you were so young, not quite 3 years old yet, your parents thought best not to tell you that he had drowned. So, but you have your recall of it, and I would like you to share that with us, if you will.
Thank you, Maxine. The mind has a way of capturing something that it cannot interpret at the time. And hopefully that memory, those pictures that are recorded in the brain, someday make sense. I have a vivid picture in my mind of a little girl walking through her living room and encountering a long wooden structure in our living room that was not part of the original furniture. And my mother standing beside this crying, and my mother was kneeling and my father was crying. And the two girls from across the street came over and got me and my brother and took us to their house to feed us breakfast. I can see that plate of eggs and bacon and grits, and I wondered what was going on. There was a lot of movement. And later on, I found out, my brother and I had a conversation just the other day, and he said, the folks were so secretive about things. And I said, what I have come to believe? They wanted to protect us. They wanted to protect us from the harm and hatefulness that was a part of the world. And so they discussed those things not with us and not around us. But later on, I found out that my brother, who was 16, going into his senior year of high school, a very brilliant young man, I must say. I remember he wrote poetry, and he wrote dissertations and essays, and he recorded them. We had a record of his recording of one of those. It was way back when the records were made on a metal disc, and then it had some kind of a plastic coating on front and back. Eventually, it just deteriorated. But anyway, he loved to swim, and there was no place for him to swim. And so on a Sunday morning after going to Mass and getting permission from my father that he could use the car and take his girlfriend to the movies, the drive-in movies that evening because it was her birthday, he went swimming. He and 3 of his friends got on their bicycles and they rode to the lake on LSU's campus, right off of Stanford Avenue, where there is now a BREC monument to a philanthropist. But that's where my brother drowned. He went out, and he never came back the way he went in. But one thing my father was determined to do was to not have us afraid of the water or of swimming. He made sure that we went to places outside of the city where we could swim, and he was very instrumental with Reverend Brooks. They both worked at Standard Oil, and so they were very instrumental in seeing that money was raised so that we would have a pool. And I remember that pool. I went and I learned to swim, and we enjoyed it. And you know what? I went by there the other day, and it's closed up. It's not cemented in, but there are leaves and grass and dirt. And I cried when I saw it. And I would like at this, well, I'll wait. But anyway, there were so many boys, particularly, who had given their lives up. And finally, the community said, this is enough. Enough is enough. And we're not going to wait for them to give us permission. We're going to build our own.
I'm going to ask you more about the building our own. For one of the things you said, there was a lot of people came to that funeral because the whole community had been so tired of all the drownings, and this was like just one more disruptive moment of a brilliant life. And they decided that they would raise money on their own to build the Brooks Park pool. So would you talk about how that gathering sparked the community to take that action? Would you talk more about that?
Well, not too long after that, as was mentioned in the one of the videos, that Reverend Brooks was working with the Boy Scouts. And it also happened that there was a young boy in his group that drowned. And so they began to talk about, we have got to do something. And so they organized a group called the Negro Recreational, United Negro Recreation Association. And through that association, they raised money. Churches joined in. They had suppers. In those days, that was something very popular. If you needed to raise some money, you had suppers in the community. And so churches raised money through suppers. There were many black businesses that were thriving during that time. Let me tell you, I don't know if you know how long ago that was. That was 80 years ago. Now you know how old I am. But anyway, and the thing that they did too, like because Reverend Brooks and my father and many other prominent men, even Horatio Thompson, who owned the service station, also worked at Standard Oil. It was called in those days, now Exxon, and even got funding and support from Exxon to build this swimming pool. And the association had a very strong voice in saying that this is for our children, for what they need and recreation. And so this is what they did. And I believe that it took them about 2 years to build that structure, and it was a marvelous structure. may I put a plug in right here?
Absolutely.
If you have a chance, try to Google Baton Rouge's troubled waters, and that will tell you the story of bringing us to where we are now and to where Pearl George did what she did at City Park.
Yes, and the scriptwriter and the researcher for Baton Rouge Troubled Waters, Judge Trudy White, is here.
Yes. Yes, her grandfather was also a member of that association and also worked at Exxon as well. Yes.
So what is also significant about what you're saying is how much South Baton Rouge was a flourishing community that had built itself inside of, had built itself inside of these laws that had barred them, but it still was a flourishing community. And laws like the segregated pool and other laws led to this South Baton Rouge demise. So when you talked about what you'd like to see, I'm going to come back to you after I talk to Debra a little bit more, and I'll ask you both a very similar question about next. So you can see that for Debra, being there and that her mother brought her there, when you think about the fact that you didn't see her face when she watched her mother on camera, this is tough for Debra. And so I just want you to know that this is a very brave thing she's doing to be here to talk about this and to know the value of having her here. So when she tell her experience, she was there. And I don't know that any of you can really totally identify what that experience was like. But I have asked her, and we've had many conversations to see if she was willing to do this for all of us. And so she's here. So, Debra, what do you remember about the experience? And what do you remember about how you experienced it and what happened to you? We would like to hear from you.
Okay, well, first I would like to express my sincere gratitude and appreciation for all those who have decided to honor my mother's legacy. As I recall, when we had arrived on the parking lot outside in front of the gallery, there were many law enforcement officers, as well as, I would always say, men in black suits, but come to find out it was the FBI. It was apparent that the law officers and FBI had been tipped off, and that was the terminology that I heard just listening to adults talking. So when we had come to the pool, to the locker room area, well, we tried to enter the locker room area, but there was a young white boy standing in front of the door, and he told us we could not enter. So then at that time, my aunt, Betty Claiborne, attempted to push him out the way, and then after that ensued, we decided to leave. So as we were walking away to the parking lot to get into our cars, I was standing next to a car, and a white man pushed me against the car, and I fell back. And that's when my mother did what she had to do to protect me. After that, I saw so much confusion going on, and I saw a big truck, and I come to find out it was a paddy wagon. So they were loading all the men and women into the paddy wagon. Now, how I got up on that step, I don't know, of that paddy wagon. I don't know if I climbed up there because I had seen my mother going in there or someone put me there. I don't know. But I know as I was standing on the step, someone pushed me in, which was a white man. So when we were inside of the paddy wagon, it was extremely hot. I can remember the temperature just being extremely hot. So once we got to the jail, I assume, we stayed in the paddy wagon for a pretty long time. And I think they did it purposely. So when they finally took us out, I don't know which direction my mother had gone into. All I know, I was brought into a room alone. And a white man had come in, and he was asking me questions. I can't recall what questions they were, but when I would respond, I would say yes, and I would say no. And he would respond, and I'm going to say the word, nigger, you're supposed to say yes, sir, and no, sir. And after that, and to let you know, I wasn't afraid. My mother told me, she always told me, be strong, do not be afraid. And I wasn't. And I stood my ground when it was like several white men would come in at different times, questioning me. And I would still say no and yes. And of course, the more I said no and yes, I was called a little nigger, a little monkey. So I was, after that, someone had come in and they say, is Pearl George your mother? I said, yes, she is. So he walked out. Then another one came in, and they were pretty nice to me then because someone offered me a Coke, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So they were very kind to me then after I told them who my mom was. Oh, prior to that, I'm sorry, I was told that I would be put into juvenile detention. So they were using all type of tactics to make me feel fear, which I did not. So after that, I can recall that my grandfather had come to get me. And I didn't know where my mom was. And I asked my grandfather, I said, well, where is my mom? And he told me that she's in jail. I said, well, when is she coming home? He said, I do not know. So after that particular ride home, which was very long, a long ride home, I started weeping. And my grandfather told me, it's going to be okay. But to me, I didn't think it was going to be okay because I feared the fact that it's a possibility that my mom would not come home. Because during that time, many blacks were killed, beaten, murdered. So I didn't know whether she was going to come home or not. So after that, I lived with my grandfather for a while. Then I lived with my aunt for a while. And after the 6 months that she was in jail, I think it's been only maybe 3 months, I'm not sure. I think I'm going into your next question.
Go ahead.
So when she had come home, I cried, I wept, I embraced her, she embraced me. And I was so happy to see my mom. So then she went further on and she continued working with boycotting and picketing. And for many, many nights, I would cry myself to sleep, especially when she wasn't home, for fear that she would not return home. I remember when I was living with my aunt, we got a phone call after my mother had returned home from Martin Luther King's funeral that there had been several gunshots in our home. But thankfully, my mother had just gotten in, but she wasn't in the room where the gunshots were. And my aunt and I were called, so we got in the car and we went down to my home to check on my mom, and everything was okay. So it was constantly living in fear.
So did you wish she had not been as much of an activist? Because it's interesting that you weren't afraid. At some point, did you become afraid for her?
Yes. I never did wish that she wasn't involved the way she was. I often prayed that God would keep her and protect her, but I was very proud of her. And not to mention the fact that I often referred to her as my superhero. And my mother was more of a humanitarian because she cared for all people, but she just wanted our people to be treated fairly as well as others. Thank you.
So you can see the thread of this disenfranchisement that showed up as far as the pool. But as you heard, this had an impact on the community beyond that moment. And In the case of South Baton Rouge, there were many other of those barriers to access. And you mentioned when I talked to you, even about the interstate being built across that community, ended up being a demise to that community. So when you think about what this commemoration means and what it has meant for the image of South Baton Rouge that has lost what it had built up as a flourishing community where affluent people lived, to become now an image of, oh, that's South Baton Rouge, that's the bottom, that's where crime and things happen. What would you like to see next? You heard Janelle Logan say, this is this art exhibit, and as you heard Zero talk about what it meant to have, and I love that he used Black people as love, to have this experience in the face of money. What would you like to see come from this or from this legacy?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that you talked about a South Baton Rouge that I knew, that I grew up in, and it was a very self-sufficient community. We had all of the businesses that we needed to take care of ourselves. We had professionals, doctors, dentists. These were all African-American doctors and dentists. And we had a pharmacy. We had post office. We had bakeries and restaurants and schools. We had people in the community who were stalwart. They stood for greater things. They taught us how to be the best that we could be. And we didn't know that we were deprived, because whatever we needed, they took care of it for us. There were a few things that we could not, they could not provide for us. But for most of those things, that's why building that pool was something that they just took on, because they were accustomed to providing for themselves. They didn't need to ask anybody to provide for them. They could provide for themselves. And so the whole idea that South Baton Rouge now has become a desolate, a negative kind of connotation when people talk about it, it is hurtful. I worked with a committee at South Baton Rouge, and we put up what was called the Wall of Fame. And on that wall, we have pictures all over the Butler building that represent those people that came before us in all the walks of life. But the buildings are gone. The reminders of what we had are gone. They have been torn down, and other things have taken their place, or nothing has taken their place. And we have been robbed of that tangible history. But like that picture I have of my brother and my family when he died, you can't take that away from the people. But if you ask me what I'd like to see, number one, I have to say this, Corey, what plans do you have for Brooks Park, for the swimming pool? I would like to see it opened again. We need it. You're opening many other things and doing a lot of great things, and I applaud you for that. But I would like to see that pool open again. The hole is there, and the children are in the neighborhood, and I would like to challenge you. And another thing, speaking of the National Negro Recreation Association, I understand that there was a document that was prepared when BREC took over that park, that should that area ever not be used for recreation, that it would be reverted back to that association. So now if y'all gonna do anything with it, give it back to us.
I would be remiss if I would allow Corey just to be beat up here tonight. I wouldn't do it. Theda, let me tell you what we did last summer. Corey, speak up. Don't take that lick. Last summer, we walked and, Jeff, you my man. We walked that district. We got children. Brooks Park was open and they swam all day and night. The issue is lifeguards. I've even asked, and if there's any lifeguards in here, come forward, please. BREC will pay for you. And so that's part of it. And then I tell you what, you child-centered, I want you to take on with me about getting those children round up, getting those lifeguards, and then have some swimming again, even water aerobics for us in the morning.
All right.
All that sound great, but I'm proud of you, Corey, for standing there knowing your job.
I gotta give credit where credit is due. Carolyn Coleman, we go back a long way, and she will admit I brought her to East Baton Rouge Parish School System, so she can talk to me like that, okay? All right, so I accept the challenge that we will work together. Judge Trudy needs to be very actively involved in that because she knows about the document. Let me give the group a little background as far as I know it. When McKinley Middle School was being built, they needed a few more inches of land in order to build the school as they wanted it. And therefore, they needed some of BREC's land. And so, there was an agreement that, because BREC owned it then, that EBR school system would be able to get a few yards of that land in exchange for the use of that land and that facility by the McKinley Middle School. And so is that being done?
Yes, ma'am. McKinley Middle uses Brooks.
They use the pool
Yes, ma'am.
on a regular basis? Is the pool open on a regular basis?
The pool is open, ma'am. We have swim lessons going right now.
Okay, well, we'll have some dialogue on that. I think this is the opportunity for opening the dialogue on what we're going to do with Brooks Park. Okay, thank you so much.
Gotta love South Baton Rouge. And Theda Williams.
And while I have the mic, I'm wound up. Let me say also that because there are so many significant spots and locations and businesses that have been torn down or dismantled in South Baton Rouge, one of the projects that my committee had thought about before COVID and before another community activist, Joan Forbes, we wanted to have some monuments erected, some plaques. I think Mayor, I think Joan spoke to you about some of that some years ago. Something to denote those significant spots in the community. And so I would like for there to be some kind of dialogue and something to follow through on that. That's what I'd like to see. We can't revive South Baton Rouge, but we can at least commemorate it. What's that? Historical markers. Yes, historical markers.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have a question. If the Lord would bless us to commemorate Pearl George by putting that pool back at Gus Young, we have the same situation today, about an acre of land that belongs to the school board, right behind the park, and I have been working consistently for a pool, which was promised. And those of you who know how to pray, pray for me, Brother Elvin, Bobby Burns, that the Lord would bless us to get the pool that was promised to the children by BREC for 3 years. I will not give up. I will die trying. We have the same situation today that we had 50 or 60 years ago. It's still going on. Pray for me. I will not give up. Thank you.
So the love for the South Baton Rouge community is showing, for the old South Baton Rouge is showing here. And it can almost turn it into a community meeting because that's showing here. And the pride for the heroes, Pearl George and Betty Claiborne and the others who showed up, and to hear Debra call her mother a superhero. A lot of times, civil rights movement have been romanticized because it's so far in the distance in the minds of you who are so young, and wasn't here for that or was not a part of it. But when you hear her experience and what she went through, you can't call that anything but traumatic for an 11-year-old. Whether she was frightened or not, she was still experiencing a traumatic situation. And for what her mother stood for and what you went through, and that so many of us forget that we have benefited from a civil rights movement, from those civil rights stands. And so, as you heard Janelle say, that this exhibit and these artists, they put into this what they wanted to express about this time, and about the clarification of this exhibit was not to talk about the past only, but to bring it into the moment that we're still dealing with. There's no way Zero could have done that poem just about the past. He's talking about now. We're still dealing with barriers that may not be legally erected, but the injustices are continuing. So, Debra, when you think about what your mother went through, continuing with her activism and her service, humanitarian service, and her elected roles, and what your life had to endure with having your mother have this experience, I just can't imagine what it's like to fall into your mother's arms when she comes home from jail, when she was jailed unjustly. So we don't have her to tell us what's next, but what would you like to see next, not just for South Baton Rouge, but for Baton Rouge?
Since Baton Rouge is a racially diverse city, I would like to see all people work together to improve social injustices, as well as many other issues that needs to be addressed, to come together as one people. And another thing that I would like to see, in my mother's words, is she say that as a society and as a people, that we should work together to make sure that no person that is sick does not go unattended. No person that is hungry should go unfed. And I feel that we should pull together as a community to improve all communities. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Mayor Broom?